Here's a very special book relating very strongly to the history of England. It's called William the Conqueror. It's a Ladybird book, an adventure from history. It's part of series, if we have a look in here, 561, and you can see it's book number 2. This is one of the oldest books that I've got. First published 1956 by Wills and Hepworth. If you look down here, first published 1956 by Wills and Hepworth Limited, Loughborough, England. Written by L. Dugard Peach with illustrations by John Kenny. William the Conqueror. For 150 years after the time of Alfred the Great, people were continually fighting one another all over England. What the country needed was a strong king who could keep order. In France, there was a young boy whose name was William, who was the son of the Duke of Normandy. This was the boy who, in the year 1066, came and conquered England. When William was only 8 years old, his father died. For years he had to remain hidden, because there were men in France who wished to kill the young boy and steal the country and the castles which had belonged to his father. The Duke, Robert of Normandy, was the cousin of King Edward the Confessor of England, and when William was 24 years of age, he came to this country to visit his kinsman. When William saw what a green and pleasant country England was, he thought he would very much like to be its king, so he persuaded Edward to promise him the crown. This was something which Edward had no right to do, because in those days the king was chosen by a council of wise men. It was very unlikely that they would agree to choose a French duke to be a king of England, but William was already thinking of the future. At the time, there was in England a young Saxon called Harold, and everybody wanted Harold to be the next king. One day, Harold was in a ship which was wrecked on the coast of France. When he and his sailors got ashore, they were not treated kindly, as shipwrecked sailors are today. They were taken prisoners and put into horrible dungeons. This was because at that time it was considered quite fair to take a man prisoner and then make his relations or friends pay a lot of money to get him back again. Even an English king, Richard I, was later held to ransom, as it was called, in this way. When William heard that Harold had been taken prisoner, he immediately sent for him, and the man who had captured Harold at once brought him to William's castle in Normandy. William received Harold in a friendly way and told him how sorry he was that he had been put into a dungeon. He took Harold out hunting and even conferred upon him the order of knighthood. All this was in order to get Harold to make the same promise that Edward had made. Harold, of course, wanted to be king himself, but he was really William's prisoner, and he knew that if he did not promise what William asked him, he would never get back to England at all. So he promised to help William to become King of England when Edward should die. William had not been honest with Harold, because when Harold had made his promise, William had told him to put his hand on a box. Harold did not know that inside the box were some very sacred relics. This meant that if Harold broke his promise, very terrible things would happen to him. When Harold returned to England, he said that he had only promised because he was a prisoner, and not of his own free will. So when King So when King Edward died on January the 5th, 1066, Harold was crowned King of England in the newly built Westminster Abbey. William was very angry when he heard this. He was more determined than ever to be King of England himself. So he gathered together all his soldiers to sail across to England and capture it by force. William the Conqueror was a very clever man. He wanted to make quite sure that his soldiers would be able to land in England, and he was afraid that if Harold was on the beach with a large army, this would not be easy. So William made friends with a man called Tostig, who was actually Harold's brother, but they had quarrelled and Tostig had been banished from England. William was sure that Tostig must be very angry with Harold and would want to be revenged on him. William was right. So one night William and Tostig sat over a map of England, and Tostig agreed to invade the north of England a few days before William invaded the south. They hoped that Harold would march north to fight Tostig, and William would be able to land without opposition. In the meantime, William had gathered together hundreds of ships in the French harbours opposite England. But the late summer gales in the Channel wrecked a lot of the French ships before they sailed, and William's soldiers began to wish they had not so cheerfully engaged to cross the sea and invade England. It began to look as though all the ships and stores which William had gathered would be wasted, simply because his soldiers were afraid that fortune had turned against them. Just at that moment, a new bright star with a fiery tail appeared in the sky. We know today that it was Halley's comet, but William persuaded his followers that it was a heavenly sign, meaning that they would win a great victory over the English. The appearance of the new star put fresh heart into William's soldiers. They went on board the ships feeling that the invasion of England was under special protection. It must have been a wonderful sight as William's fleet set out from France. The ships were all brightly painted, with coloured sails and gay flags fluttering at their mastheads. A man whose father saw them sailing across to England wrote, "I heard my father say that there were 700 ships, less 4, when they sailed from St. Valery, and there were, besides these ships, boats and skiffs for the purpose of carrying the arms and harness." You may be sure that there were plenty of anxious men watching on the Kentish cliffs. Everyone knew that William had gathered together an army and hundreds of ships for the invasion of England, but no one knew exactly when he would come. Harold had gathered a large army. For many weeks they had been waiting, ready to stop William's men from landing. But now Harold had marched north to York with all his men to fight Tostig. William's plan had succeeded. So when the watchers on the cliffs saw the hundreds of ships coming, all they could do was to send messengers galloping away on horses to warn Harold and his army in the far north. Harold had meanwhile won a victory against Tostig at Stamford Bridge near York. Tostig and the King of Norway, who had come to help him, were both killed in the battle, and Harold and his soldiers were resting and tending their wounds after the fight. Harold knew, of course, that William's army might land on the south coast at any moment. As soon as his weary soldiers were rested, he would have to retrace his steps down the long road to Kent. What Harold did not know was that a messenger was galloping through the night to tell him that William's army was already on the way. William landed on the coast of England without anyone trying to stop him. He must have smiled to himself at the thought of Harold's army far away in the north. It must have been a very busy sight on the beach near Pevensey when all the horses and soldiers were coming ashore. First the archers, with their bows and arrows, ready to shoot at anyone who came against them. Then the knights, in full armour, ready to mount their horses and charge the enemy. But there was no enemy, only a few watchers high up on the cliffs. As William himself landed, he tripped and fell. His followers thought this was a bad sign. But William stood up with both hands full of sand and earth. "Look," he said, "I have seized England with my 2 hands." The Normans were now safely ashore in England, but they knew that Harold's army would be marching south to fight them. The first thing they had to do was to build a fort, inside which they would be safer than on the open beach. We are told by the man whose father saw them how William and his knights consulted together and decided where to build the fort. This was easy because William had brought with him everything that was needed. Hundreds of carpenters came from the ships with all the separate parts of the fort ready-made. Instead of nails, there were barrels full of wooden pegs made of hard oak to fasten the parts together. Before nightfall, the fort was finished. Up in the north of England, Harold lost no time. As soon as the weary messenger had told him that William had landed, Harold ordered the trumpets to be sounded. Within a few minutes, the tired soldiers were on their feet again, ready to begin their long march. Harold and his knights had horses, but most of the soldiers had to march all the way from York to the south coast. This took them many days, and by the time they got there, William had made ready to fight them. He had done something else. He ordered all his ships to be drawn up on the beach, and had told the carpenters to bore holes in them so that they would not float. His men knew that they had either to win or die. They could not get back to France. At last Harold and his army arrived, and gathered together on a hill not far from William and his men. William knew that he must attack at once before Harold's army grew any larger. So, calling on his knights, he charged towards the hill. The Battle of Hastings was fought on October the 14th, in the year 1066. This is one of the most important days in the history of England. At first, Harold and his men seemed to be winning because they kept together and were able to beat off the Norman knights. When the knights fell back, the English thought the battle was over and rushed down the hill after them. It was a great mistake for the English to charge down the hill after the Norman knights. By doing so, they became scattered and could not help one another. So it was easy for the Normans, who were all on horses, to strike down the unmounted English. King Harold did not charge down the hill with the others. He and a few of his men saw that this was a mistake, and they remained around their banner on the top of the hill. When William saw this, he ordered his archers to shoot their arrows high into the air so that they would drop down onto Harold and his men. Soon the arrows were falling thick and fast, and Harold and the few men who remained with him could not stop them all with their shields. Many of them were killed or wounded, and finally an arrow struck Harold in the eye. With the death of their brave leader, the English knew that the battle was lost, and soon all of them were killed or taken prisoner by the Normans. The Battle of Hastings was lost. There exists today a wonderful picture called the Bayeux Tapestry, showing the invasion of England by William and the Battle of Hastings. The first thing William did after winning the battle was to march to London. There were no longer any English fighting men to bar his way, and soon he reached the gates of the city. William expected to find the gates closed, but instead of this he was met by the bishops and nobles. They knew that they could not stop William from conquering the whole of England, so they asked him to be King of England without any more fighting. William accepted, and in a very old book written at the time, it is recorded that he promised to be a kind lord to the English people. Most of the time, William kept that promise. So a Norman duke became King of England. William decided that he would be crowned at Westminster in exactly the same way Harold had been. He wanted people to think of him as a true English king and not as a foreign conqueror. So on Christmas Day, in the year 1066, William of Normandy rode through the streets of London to his coronation. It was snowing hard, and the streets and houses were white, but we can be sure that all the people came out to see what the new king looked like. Inside the abbey, William was crowned by the Archbishop of York on one side and a French bishop on the other. As the crown was put on his head, all the nobles shouted. Unfortunately, the Norman soldiers outside thought that a riot had broken out, and many people were killed before order was restored. There stands in London today a building which will always remind us of William the Conqueror. This is the Tower of London. This great keep was built by William on the place where, long before, the Romans had built a fort. Its purpose was to protect London. But it had also another reason. William was never quite sure whether English people would not rise against him. In the Tower of London, guarded by his soldiers, he knew that he was safe. The part of the Tower of London built by William is the central keep. It is called the White Tower because of the whiteness of the stone which William caused to be brought all the way from Caen in Normandy. William believed that it was the duty of a king to see that the government of the country was properly carried out. In those days there was no parliament as we know it today. The king had one or two men to advise him, but he had to do most of the work himself. William worked hard. He often acted as a judge in the court of law, and wherever he went he was always trying to find out what people thought and what they wanted. He was harsh to those who broke the law, but he was always ready to change a law which he thought was unjust. There were, of course, still people in England who did not like being ruled by a foreign king. In the north of England there were many such people. Several times William had to march all the way from London with his army to put down rebellions. Then came the destruction of York. The men of Northumbria killed the Norman governor and all his soldiers. Once more William brought his army to restore order. This time he determined that he would put an end to it. He ordered his men to burn every house and destroy everything they could find between the Humber and the Tees. This part of England remained a wilderness for more than 50 years. William devastated the north to prevent further rebellion. He also cleared a large part of the south of England for another reason. William was very fond of hunting. In those days, wild deer and even wild boar were to be found in England. William decided that he would set aside a part of his new kingdom as a hunting ground. He marked out an area nearly 100 miles round, lying between the River Avon and Southampton Water, containing more than 50 parishes. Then he sent his men to pull down all the houses and churches and villages and drive away all the people who lived there. This was one of the occasions on which William broke his promise to be a kind lord. The area which William cleared remains today as the New Forest in the county of Hampshire. In the clearing of the New Forest, William was thinking only of his own pleasure, not of the welfare of his people. But in many ways William was a wise man and a good king. One of the things which he did was to order that a great book should be made of all the land and all the people living in England. This had never been done before. So William sent parties of men in all directions, telling them to ask everybody about their land and their houses, their farms and their cattle. With each party was a man who could read and write, and all the answers were carefully written down. This book exists today and can be seen in London. It is called Domesday Book, and is exactly as it was written nearly 900 years ago. William the Conqueror, now called William I, was the first real king of all England. By means of the Domesday Book, he knew exactly where everyone lived and how much property they owned. This meant that for the first time in the history of England, it was possible to ensure that all the people paid their correct taxes to the king. And by means of the castles which were built all over the country by his Norman knights, William was able to keep the king's peace. All of this took a long time to do, but it meant, in the end, that after more than 600 years of fear and uncertainty, the people of England were once more able to live their lives and work at their trades in safety. And that, my friends, is our reading of William the Conqueror, a Ladybird book, an adventure from history. And, as we've already seen, it was first published in 1956.